They cut down the one thing on my property I cared about most, and somehow expected me to smile and wave afterward. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten anybody, and I definitely didn't do anything illegal. But 14 years later, every single time it rains on that block, they still remember exactly what they did. My name's Ethan Mercer, and back then I lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside Asheville, North Carolina, on a sloped little stretch of land that backed up into the trees. It wasn't some fancy place, nothing like that. Just an older cedar-sided house with a stone patio out back and enough yard to feel like breathing room. The best part of it all sat near the rear corner of my fence line, a huge sugar maple that had been there long before I ever bought the place. That tree had character. It leaned just slightly toward the west like it had spent 50 years chasing sunsets. In July it shaded the patio, so well I could sit outside with sweet tea and barely feel the heat. In October the leaves turned this deep burnt orange and drifted over the lawn so thick you couldn't see the grass underneath. My daughter used to pile them into giant heaps when she was little and jump into them laughing until she couldn't breathe. Sounds silly maybe, but that tree carried memories. You get attached to things like that. A few years after my divorce, when the house felt way too quiet and weekends felt longer than they should have, that backyard became my reset button. Coffee in the mornings. Grill going on Fridays. Rain tapping leaves overhead. It was peaceful. Then the house behind mine sold. A younger couple moved in sometime around late spring. Tyler and Brooke Calloway. Probably mid-30s. Plenty of energy, plenty of money, and the kind of confidence that made every conversation feel like they were already halfway done listening before you spoke. At first, no big deal. Brooke waved the first morning they moved in. Tyler shook my hand and said, "We've got a few updates planned. Hope we don't drive you crazy." I laughed and told him, "As long as you're not running a jackhammer at sunrise, we're good." He smiled. Funny thing. Later I realized he smiled like that a lot. Not warm. Not exactly rude. Just like he always assumed things would go his way. Within a week the renovation started. Fresh paint. Contractors. New windows. Delivery trucks backing in every morning. Then patio furniture showed up. Outdoor speakers. Landscaping stone. And then lumber. A lot of lumber. One afternoon I walked outside with my coffee and saw framing going up behind the fence. A raised deck. Big one too. Elevated almost shoulder high from my side because of the slope, stretching across nearly the whole back of their house. Tyler noticed me looking and leaned over the rail. Finally getting our sunset deck. I nodded. Looks expensive. He grinned. Worth it. That should have been the moment I paid closer attention. But I didn't. A few days later my sister called and asked if I could drive out to Charlotte for a family thing. Just 2 nights. I left Friday afternoon and came back Sunday. And I still remember pulling into my driveway. I got out of the truck, grabbed my bag, headed through the side gate, and stopped so hard I almost dropped everything. The maple was gone. Not trimmed. Not damaged. Gone. A wide pale stump sat in the dirt where the trunk had stood. Fresh sawdust around the base. Deep cut marks still bright. For a second my brain honestly couldn't process what I was seeing. It felt wrong. Like walking into your house and seeing somebody moved a wall. I stood there staring. Then my chest got hot. I walked straight to the fence. Tyler was standing on the deck with a drink in his hand. Perfect timing. He saw me and gave a casual little nod. I pointed at the stump. "What happened to my tree?" And I swear to God, he barely hesitated. "Oh yeah, we had it taken down yesterday." Like he was mentioning he'd borrowed a ladder. I stared at him. "You had my tree cut down?" He leaned against the railing. It was blocking our sunset. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my brain refused to believe an adult human had really just said that. That trunk was 6 feet onto my property. He shrugged. Branches were hanging over our deck space. I stepped closer. "So you hired somebody to cut down a healthy tree that wasn't yours?" He gave me this little half smile. Honestly, Ethan, it looked better opened up. That sentence hit harder than the stump. Because suddenly I understood exactly who I was dealing with. Brooke slid open their back door and stepped outside. Tyler, like she knew this wasn't going well. He waved her off. I kept my voice calm. "You crossed onto my property and removed something you had zero right touching." Tyler took a sip of his drink. "Didn't think you'd mind that much." I looked at him for maybe 3 seconds. Then I said, "Okay." That was it. No yelling. No threats. No dramatic scene. I turned around and went back inside. And for the rest of that night, I sat on my patio staring at that stump while the evening sun poured directly onto Tyler's shiny new deck. The whole yard felt different. Too bright. Too exposed. Too quiet. I barely slept. Next morning I called a certified arborist named Daniel Reeves. Good guy. Gray beard. 30 years doing tree work all over western North Carolina. He walked the property, checked the stump, crouched down, and shook his head. This was a beautiful tree. Yeah. Healthy too. He measured the diameter, ran numbers, then looked up. Ethan, replacement value on something like this gets real expensive. I nodded. Part of me wanted that answer. Lawyer up. Send letters. Make noise. But Daniel stayed crouched there a second longer, studying the ground around the roots. Then he looked toward the hill behind Tyler's property and said something that changed everything. Huh? I asked. What? He stood up and brushed dirt off his jeans. That maple was drinking a whole lot more water than your neighbors probably realize. I followed his eyes uphill. The slope behind both houses rolled down toward the fence line. Daniel pointed. Without these roots soaking up runoff, heavy rain's gonna move different. I said, different how? He looked toward Tyler's brand new deck and smiled just a little. Well, gravity's got opinions. I stood there with Daniel for another minute while he studied the slope like he was reading blueprints nobody else could see. He pointed with the end of his boot toward the rear corner of my fence, then traced an invisible path downhill. Water always wants the same thing, he said. The easiest route. I looked where he was pointing. The grade behind both houses tilted toward the property line. Not dramatically, just enough. And the lowest point was the outside corner of Tyler's new deck. Daniel folded his arms. That tree had a massive root network. Every storm, it was pulling water out of this whole stretch. You remove it, he shrugged. Nature starts renegotiating. I couldn't help smiling. Not a big smile. Just enough. Then Daniel added one more thing. If you decide to rework this area for drainage or landscaping, on your side, completely legal. And that was the moment the whole thing clicked. Not revenge in some loud, dramatic way. Nothing reckless. Nothing petty enough to backfire. Just letting gravity do exactly what gravity already wanted to do. By Wednesday morning, a landscaping crew pulled into my driveway. 3 guys from a local company I'd hired years earlier. Miguel, the owner, stepped out and looked over the plans. Dry creek bed. Yep. He raised an eyebrow. Decorative. Mostly. He grinned. Got it. Tyler and Brooke were outside in less than 5 minutes. Brooke folded her arms near the fence. Tyler leaned over the deck rail. What are you building? I glanced up casually. Landscaping. He looked suspicious already. Miguel's crew started digging a shallow, winding trench through the exact corner where the maple used to stand. We lined it with heavy black fabric, smooth river stones, dark mulch, and tall, ornamental grasses. It looked expensive, intentional, like something out of a home magazine. Beautiful. And underneath it all sat a clean drainage channel guiding runoff toward the natural slope beside their deck. Still on my property. Still completely legal. Tyler watched almost the whole afternoon. At one point he called over. Looks fancy. I nodded. Figured the backyard deserved something after losing that maple. He stared at me for half a second, then walked inside. The first storm came Friday night. A real Appalachian downpour. Heavy rain hammering the roof. Wind shaking branches. The kind of storm where gutters sound like waterfalls. I barely slept. Not because I was worried. Because I was curious. I stepped outside at sunrise with coffee in hand. And there it was. Water flowing exactly where Daniel predicted. A smooth stream sliding down from the hill, feeding into the creek bed, moving along the edge of my yard. Perfect. Clean. Controlled. And right beside Tyler's deck, the ground had turned dark and soft. Not flooded. Nothing crazy. Just saturated. The lower stairs sat over thick mud. By lunchtime, Tyler was outside inspecting it. He crouched near the bottom step, pressed a shoe down, pulled it back out, covered in wet dirt. I sipped coffee and pretended not to notice. 2 days later, things dried out. Mostly. Then another storm rolled through. Harder this time. By morning, the outer corner post had shifted just enough to notice. Tiny movement. Maybe half an inch. Not dangerous, but enough that the railing had a slight wobble. Tyler stood on the deck, bouncing his weight, watching it move, then looking toward my yard. I gave him a polite wave. He didn't wave back. The weeks after that got entertaining. Every rainstorm repeated the same cycle. Water followed the slope, Creek bed handled it beautifully. Their deck corner stayed soaked. Their expensive outdoor rug developed dark, damp spots. The lower stair treads sank uneven. Guests started avoiding that side. One Saturday, they had friends over. You could hear music playing, laughter, a grill going. Then I heard somebody say, "Whoa, careful." A woman stepped down and her sandals sank into mud. Not enough to fall. Enough to squeal and jump back. Tyler muttered something I couldn't hear. Brooke definitely heard, because 10 seconds later they were arguing quietly near the sliding doors. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but decks amplify sound. Brooke said, "You should have listened." Tyler snapped something back. Then the door slammed. That was probably the first crack. Not in the deck. In their confidence. Then came late summer. A huge thunderstorm rolled through overnight. The kind where rain pounds sideways and everything smells like wet earth by sunrise. When I stepped outside, the creek bed looked incredible. River stones shining. Water flowing like a natural stream. And Tyler's lower deck stairs looked miserable. Mud everywhere. The rug soaked. One post leaned just slightly enough to notice from a distance. Not collapsing. Not unsafe. Just permanently inconvenient. Which honestly made it even better. Because they couldn't ignore it, but they couldn't really accuse me of anything either. Everything on my side looked beautiful. Professional. Intentional. By then Brooke had stopped waving entirely. Tyler started pacing the deck when storms came through. Checking drainage. Watching the edge. Staring toward my yard. One afternoon, I was trimming hedges when he walked over. No smile this time. No drink in hand. No sunset deck swagger. Just irritation. He stopped at the fence. "Did your landscaping change drainage?" I kept clipping branches. The maple used to absorb most of it. He stared. "You redirected water." I lowered the trimmers. "No. Nature redirected water. I just landscaped my property." He clenched his jaw. This wasn't happening before. I looked directly at him. Before, there was a mature tree there. That landed. Hard. He looked toward the stump area. Then back at me. And for the first time since he moved in, he didn't have a comeback. He just stood there. Then said, quieter, "This deck cost a lot." I nodded. I imagine it did. He laughed once. Short and annoyed. "So what, you're proving a point?" I leaned against the fence. "No. You proved the point when you hired somebody to cut down a tree you didn't own." He looked genuinely angry. Then weirdly tired. Like the argument had already started wearing him down. Brooke opened the sliding door and called from inside, "Tyler." He didn't answer. Just stared another second. Then walked away. After that the storms kept coming. Fall arrived. Leaves started dropping. Except now the corner where the maple had stood stayed open and bare. That still bothered me more than I expected. The revenge felt satisfying, but losing the tree still felt personal. Some evenings I'd sit outside and instinctively glance up for shade that wasn't there. Or wait for that rustling sound overhead. And catch myself. A month later Daniel came by to check another property nearby and stopped in. He looked over the creek bed. Then over Tyler's deck. Whistled. "Well." I laughed. "Yep." He nodded. Nature negotiated. Then he asked quietly, "You ever planning to replace the tree?" "Maybe." He studied the open spot. "You should. A mature transplant would work if the budget's there." That thought stayed with me. Because the truth was, I wanted the tree back. Not a sapling. Not something symbolic. I wanted something substantial. Something real. A few days later, another storm rolled through, and by the next afternoon Tyler finally crossed the yard and knocked on my back porch door. I opened it, and immediately noticed the difference. He looked worn out. No smug grin. No easy confidence. His jeans were muddy. He rubbed the back of his neck, then said words I honestly never expected to hear. "Can we talk?" I opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch. Tyler stood there looking like a guy who hadn't slept much. His boots were caked with mud halfway up the sides. The hem of his jeans was wet, and whatever confidence he'd walked around with all summer had pretty much disappeared. He glanced past me toward the backyard, then back at me. "Can we talk?" I nodded once. "Sure." We stood there on the porch with rainwater still dripping off the gutters. For a second neither of us said anything. Then Tyler exhaled. I screwed up. Simple. Direct. Honestly, I respected that more than I expected. I folded my arms. "Yeah." He gave this tired half laugh. No argument there. Then he rubbed his forehead. "The deck contractor came back yesterday. Said the lower support footings still stable. But unless the soil dries out long term, they're gonna keep fighting movement every rainy season." I didn't say anything. He kept going. And Brooks furious. That part almost made me smile. Almost. He looked out toward the creek bed. I didn't realize that tree was doing all that. I finally answered. I told you it mattered. He nodded. I know. Then he surprised me. I shouldn't have touched it. Not we. Not excuses. Not blaming contractors. Just him. I wanted the view, he said. I thought. Branches hanging over the deck, opening things up, make the yard feel bigger. Honestly, I figured you'd be irritated for a week and then move on. I stared at him, and when I asked what happened, you said it looked better. He shut his eyes for half a second. Yeah, that was a stupid thing to say. A pretty memorable one. He actually laughed. Fair enough. Then his face got serious again. What would it take to fix this? There it was. The question I'd known was coming. And weirdly, by then I already had the answer. I pointed toward the rear corner of the yard. Pay for a mature sugar maple. He followed my finger. Exactly there. Exactly there. He stared at the empty patch. Then asked the obvious question. A full-size transplant. Yep. He let out a long breath. That's expensive. I shrugged. So was your sunset deck. That one landed. He looked away, then nodded slowly. Okay. No argument. No negotiation. Just okay. And for the first time since all this started, I felt the anger leave. Not disappear, but loosen. A week later, a tree-moving company rolled in with equipment that looked like it belonged on a construction site. Huge root ball. Steel braces. A mature sugar maple nearly 20 feet tall. Not as massive as the original. Nothing could replace decades overnight. But it had presence. Weight. Branches. Shade. Life. I stood there while they lowered it into the exact same corner. Fresh soil packed around the roots. Water lines set. Support cables tightened. Tyler stood beside the fence watching. Quiet. Brooke came out too. She looked at the tree for a long time. Then she looked at me. And to her credit, she said, "It's beautiful." I nodded. "It will be." Tyler paid every invoice. Tree. Labor. Drainage adjustment. Even extra soil grading near the deck. No complaints. No bargaining. And over the next year something interesting happened. The new maple rooted in stronger than expected. Its canopy spread wider. The drainage improved naturally. The muddy corner stabilized. The deck stopped shifting. And the whole neighborhood kind of forgot the drama happened. Mostly. Except every time it rained. Tyler still checked that lower stair. Every single time. Didn't matter if it was drizzle or a thunderstorm. He'd step outside. Look down. Then glance toward the tree. Like muscle memory. Like his brain still expected consequences. And honestly, maybe that was consequence enough. Years passed. The maple kept growing. Its leaves turned orange every fall, just like the old one used to. My daughter visited one October and stood under it smiling. Feels like home again. That hit me harder than I expected. Because she was right. For a while after the original tree got cut down, the whole backyard felt wrong. Like something sacred got replaced with noise and sunlight and irritation. The new tree changed that. It gave the space its heartbeat back. Tyler changed too. More than I expected. He stopped trying to impress everyone. Started waving when he saw me. Helped shovel snow one winter. Dropped off tomatoes from their garden one summer. Normal neighbor stuff. Human stuff. Like maybe being forced to own a mistake actually did him some good. Or maybe 14 months of staring at muddy stairs humbled him. Could have been either. But here's where people always argue when I tell this story. Because some folks hear it and say, "Ethan, you should have sued him." Others say you went too far. And every now and then somebody laughs and says, "Nope, that was perfect." Truth is, I still miss the original tree. You can't replace decades. You can't recreate memories exactly. And if Tyler had just walked over that first day and said, "Hey, I made a mistake. Maybe none of the rest happens. Maybe we solve it differently." But he didn't. He stood on that new deck, looked over my fence, and told me my tree was blocking his sunset. And for a while there, gravity had an opinion about that. So now I'm curious what you think. Was I justified? Or did I take it too far? If your neighbor cut down something on your property for a better view, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments. I read more of them than I probably should. And if you enjoy real neighborhood revenge stories where the line between justice and payback gets a little blurry, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because trust me, this neighborhood was never the quiet little place everybody thought it was.